Rabbi, I have a question. Is there
Of an intro. So first of all, welcome. We're here. Don't worry. So welcome. So this class is generally called Experience Zohar, and what we do is that we go through a portion of the Zohar every week. Now the thing is that this week there is no Zohar for whatever reason on the actual Parsha, but what we have today is the actual Yahrtzeit, is the actual anniversary of the passing of the Arizal. And literally behind me, there are cars that are traveling down. This street is actually behind us, is called the Rehov Ari, the Ari street. And there are people, the block is shut down by the police because there's so many people that want to get through. And only people that live in the vicinity actually get to drive their cars down. Everybody else gets to walk. I actually pulled my my driver's license because it says that Ari 6. That was like before we moved, so I lived up the block, and I'm like yes, because I don't feel like walking so much, especially. So it's unbelievable because literally we are a couple of minutes from the Arizal. So what I figured that we do tonight, instead of going through the actual Zohar, right? So we're going to go through a portion of the Arizal on the Parsha. So let me give you a brief intro. So you're going to hear a lot about the Arizal over the weekend, like who he was and right, his teachings, etc. But I just want to give you a brief understanding of just before we look into the text. So the Arizal did not write anything. Okay, so he himself did not write. Who wrote all of his material? It was his student, who is called Rabbi Chaim Vital, who lived over here in Tzfat. He was actually a bit older than Arizal, because Arizal, when he walked onto the scene in Tzfat, he was 36, right? And he lived in Tzfat for just 2 years. He passed away. So in 2 years, we have all the writings of the Arizal. And where is it? Over here in this room. Okay, I'm not sure where the Arizal, but it's that's the Sidur. The Shulchan Aruch is not the Arizal. No. It was his colleague, right, and contemporary. That was Rabbi Joseph Caro, but it wasn't the Arizal. Right. So we basically could fit the entire Arizal behind me, right, and probably twice the teachings of the Arizal that. Once again, he did not write. That was written for him in just 2 years. So most of what he wrote is completely abstract. That if we would open it up, we would be completely lost. We wouldn't find our hands and our feet. We wouldn't know what was going on, because the Arizal's teachings are they're almost scientific in the way that he broke down Kabbalistic thought, right? And he took names and he took numerology, etc. And it's extremely complicated. But there is a book of the Arizal which is called Likutei Torah, right? And the book Likutei Torah is actually a book which goes through the Parsha of the week, right? So this book over here, which is called Apples from the Orchard, this book over here is actually written by one of the people who started Ascent, right? And what he did was he took the portions of Likutei Torah, not all of what the Arizal wrote for Likutei Torah, but portions of it, and he translated it into English with a little bit of a translation to it. So
Rabbi Moshe Wisniewski, no?
Yeah, exactly. Very good. Wow. And it's good that you pronounced that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I could pronounce that, but
California, right?
He is from California. That's good. Yes. Excellent. That's our oracle over here. Yeah, we do a class like online. Yeah.
So people could ask questions.
Yeah. That's it. We're using technology. So let's pass these out. Pass these out over there. And once again, we're gonna get these for you, God willing, on a PDF over. Again, there isn't so much of the Arizal out, online that we could actually make, work a Hebrew English translation. So, So this is the best we could do, but we're going to read it out. We're going to read it out loud, and we're going to translate it. That's the second page. And I didn't get a chance to put it all in booklet form. Okay. And this is the third, and that's the fourth page. So I think I'm perfect on the copies. Yes. Okay. So another brief intro, okay? We have to know something about a Hilula, okay? What is a Hilula, okay? What is the anniversary of a death of any tzaddik? And basically, why do we celebrate it? Right? It should be the opposite. We should actually be sad that this is the day that this great person died and was taken from us from the world, right? So it should be the opposite effect, but it's not. It's not called that. In the Zohar, it's called a Hilula. And what does a Hilula mean? Anybody know what Hilula? The word Hilula, it sounds
wedding,
like it's a very
wedding day.
It means a wedding. Very good, Angelo. It means a wedding. And the question is, why is a wedding used to describe the anniversary of the death of a saintly person, right? A wedding should be the opposite, right? A burial, a mourning period, right? So it's called a wedding because every year, it's explained in Kabbalistic writings that every year a tzaddik goes up higher and higher, right, from where he was at last, right, in a previous year, right. So every year he goes up, he graduates in a sense to a higher academy. And it's called the Hilula, marriage, because he actually marries almost the divine, right? There's a merging with the spirituality, with the soul of the tzaddik, of the saintly person, with his source, right? And it goes up higher and higher every year. There's another level of joining and merging, right? So therefore it's called Hilula. And what we need to know is that when we study the works of the tzaddik on the day of his passing, it has that much more of an effect. It's almost like we're holding on to the coattails of the tzaddik. So this is very significant, not just that we're studying his teachings right now, but we're actually in his city, and we're meters away from him, right? From this saintly tzaddik who actually brought down Kabbalah, to the world, right? So by studying it and by connecting to these teachings, we're holding on to his coattails, and by doing that, we're actually going to the place that he is at right now. And where is the Arizal right now? None of us could ever fathom where he's at right now, and which spiritual realms, right? It's something that we could only imagine. But once again, by studying it, we have a connection to him. If it gets too hot. Okay, you had a question?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Do you mind passing me that water? The soda stream? Thank you. Thank you.
So the Yahrtzeit spirit is here?
Yes.
Why?
Why? Because the day of the passing of any person is a culmination of their lifetime. That means that everything that they did in their lifetime comes to this point, this halt, in a sense, right? So from the day that they were born, all their good deeds and also negative things that they did, right, are all stopped over here, right, at this point. And this person gets judged for what they did in their lifetime. Every year, exactly. That's why there's a Kaddish which is said every year on the Yahrtzeit, because the relative, right, the direct relative, says Kaddish to elevate that soul, because there is like a re-examining of that person's lifetime, right, and what they did, and their good deeds are able to go up to a higher level, right, and once again, it's a Hilula, because they could be done on a certain level with a certain consciousness, right? And they could be limited to that, right? The next year, we view this good deed on a different in a different way because a year has passed and that person elevated higher, and therefore we look at their good deeds in with a different vantage point.
But how do they do good deeds if they pass? Like, what would change from one year to the next?
So many things. For example, if I'm a person, let's say, that gives charity, right? So my charity, and it's the charity that has an effect, a long-term effect. For example, I supported a synagogue or a house of study, right? A yeshiva of some sort, and people are still benefiting from what I did during my lifetime after I passed away. So then those good deeds are right. I get the dividends. I'm not just the dividends. I get those good deeds in this world, and it's also in the opposite. It has the opposite effect. If a person wreaks like havoc on a certain city or people, and right, they do negative things. So then that negativity, if it's something that persists, so then those negative deeds are something that also direct back to that person, right? So that person gets judged every year on what he didn't, because what we do in our lifetime is not just like, disconnected. It's something that has a long-term effect forever and ever, right? By the children that we have and friends that we make and the people that we affect, right? That's why we realize that our lifetime is so precious, and it has such a special effect.
And what happens after the judgment? Sorry.
So after the judgment, so once again, there's a judgment. The person could be held down and has to go through a certain amount of time, let's say, down, in a state of maybe darkness or not as much light as the person would yearn for, would want to have. So then that's what happens. But if they get all these good deeds, right? So then the person actually goes up higher. And it's interesting, just one more point, that on Rosh Hashanah, we actually, who gets judged on Rosh Hashanah? All the souls, the living and also those that passed on, right? And the question is, again, why do the ones that passed on get judged? Right? It's because what they left in this world has an effect.
But they can no longer affect it. I mean, they have done their deeds. You have to do your deeds here. Up there, you just, it's become static. Although there might be dividends, you yourself, as a passed away neshama, can't influence it anymore. So why is there a cheshbon every year?
You could influence it. You could definitely influence it. Once again, if my money went to build a yeshiva and people are benefiting from it, people are learning Torah because of my donation, right? Or let's go even simpler. Somebody donated this table, and I'm sure somebody did to a cent. The fact is that right now we're studying using this table, so then that soul has a benefit.
You can't influence it anymore.
What? I'm sorry?
He can't influence it anymore. He put the money in the bank. He gave the table during his life.
Right.
And now he's passed away. And so he can't influence it anymore. The dividend is coming.
Exactly. It's like a dividend. It's an investment. That's why it's actually said that mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs are called asik. They're actually called a business. Asik Torah. So a person is like a good businessman, needs to know, I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to invest in that. So a person needs to know, even in mitzvahs, what kind of mitzvahs you're going to do. And actually the people that give charity, that know how to give charity, they don't just give charity just like on a whim. They give charity to places that have a long-term effect. Right?
But why does it have to be evaluated every year if you can't influence it anymore?
Because those mitzvahs are something that are tagged on to your soul root, right? To what you've done.
So what if a person invests in something and their intention was not to do a mitzvah, but inevitably through a series of events, the mitzvah does occur? Does he raise a level, so to speak, or does that not happen?
Yeah.
Even if that person was wicked.
Yeah.
For the opposite.
And it could be for the opposite, exactly. There's a story about a person, I don't know if it's a true story, but it's a person that, a rich guy from the US or something, comes to the Kotel, right? And he's never been to the Kotel before. And he sees people that are praying, and something about this one person that is praying that is so sincere really grabs his attention. And he looks at him and he really admires that dedication. And something within him is stirred, and he decides to give a sizable amount of money to charity, to one of the yeshivot, one of the places that study Torah. And he gives that money, right, to the yeshiva, like $1 million or something. Okay. After 120, this person, this guy that was davening, the guy that was praying, passes on, right? And he passes on, and in heaven, they bring like all of his mitzvos in front of him, all the good deeds and all the negative deeds. And all of a sudden, all this Torah study is piled on his positive side of the scale. And he's like, whoa, where is this coming from? From hundreds of people. It's like, I don't remember doing that, So they tell him, no, but by your earnest prayer, what you caused is this person to want to give $1 million to charity, right? And which caused all these people to study Torah, and that was your schos, right? So we don't know the cheshbon, we don't know exactly how that works, but we do know that if there is a good effect, it's something which lives on forever. It says that kedusha, that holiness, does not go away from this world. So, for example, a place of a tzaddik where a tzaddik resides, that place has an effect, right? So where he studied and where he slept and where he sat is not something which is like once in a lifetime. It's something that right, because holiness is something which lives on forever. So every year there's a higher elevation of the tzaddik. So the Arizal right now is going up to higher and higher realms, and by studying his teachings, right, some of his teachings, we are connecting to the coattails of the Arizal, and we're actually adding, in a sense, to his light, if we could say that, right? And by doing that, we ourselves get elevated. Okay, so let's have a look. If anybody would like to share their sheets with their friends. So we start this week the new book of Devarim, right, and of Deuteronomy, where Moshe recounts essentially the entire Torah, and he goes and he speaks about the 4 books, right, and he gives us a recap of the 4 books, and it's basically it's spoken through Moshe. So it's that 5th book. So he starts off, right. These are the words that were said by Moshe to the Jewish people, and Moshe began, and he says that he recounts the whole story of the Jewish people leaving Egypt, and he says that they left Egypt, that 11 days from Chorev, right, from Mount Chorev, derech Har Seir ad Kadesh Barnea. So it takes 11 days from Chorev via Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. He says that basically the Jewish people could have reached the land of Israel in a very short amount of time. So why did we have 40 years? It's because, right, we messed up. But we could have gone into Israel in a very short amount of time. And it's just 11 days from Chorev, right? What's Chorev? Anybody know what Mount Chorev is? It's Mount Sinai, right? Why is it called Chorev, by the way? So the Gemara says, the Talmud says, do you know why? Because Shiarda Churva La'olam, that destruction actually came down to the rest of the world. That by giving us the Torah, actually, the world was never as it was before the giving of the Torah. So therefore, it's called Chorev. Until this place, Kadesh Barnea. So the Arizal. So before we look at the Arizal, let's look at some of this commentary here. In the beginning of Parsha's Devarim, Moshe begins his farewell address to the Jewish people before his death. As part of his address, he rebukes them for having sinned. Although when they first left Egypt, God rushed them to the desert in order to enter the land of Israel as quickly as possible. Their sins caused him to prolong their stay in the desert for 40 years, a sign of how fast they were originally traveling, in the fact that it takes 11 days to travel from Chorev via Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea, but they miraculously traveled this distance in just 3 days. So the mystical interpretation of this verse is as follows. So the Arizal says, right, and the Arizal is speaking in kind of like code words. So again, we would not be able to really understand the Arizal without this commentary over here. So the Arizal says, Keneged, why 11? Because Keneged Zayin Milachim Demetim, V'dalid Achoraim De'ava. Okay? Achadasar Yom Echorev, Neged Zayin Milachim Demitu, V'zayin Achoraim De'ava. So these 11 days, so something that we need to understand in Kabbalistic teachings is that all names and all distances and every word in the Torah could be understood in the pshat level and in the literal understanding, as well as the highest level possible, which is called sod. So the Arizal is right away interpreting this on the level of sod. So when he says 11 days, why is it 11 days? So 11 corresponds to, right, it's the number 7, which are the 7 kings that died, okay, that fell, right? So it represents the 7 primordial kings that died and the 4 backs of Abba and Ima. Okay, so what does that mean? So in, I think it's Parshas Vayishlach, right? So at the end of that Parsha, it talks about there are 7 kings of Edom, right? That there are 7 kings that were the sons of Esav, and those are the 7 kings before there were Jewish kings. That's what the Torah says. These are the kings before there were Jewish kings. And what do they represent? So they represent a dimension of tohu, basically of chaos. Okay, so there's 7 kings. There are the kings of Edom, the kings of Esau. Who is Esau? Who is Esav? Esav is that wild man, right? He's the right. He represents the Isha Sadeh, right, the man of the field, and his nature, right, represents the world of chaos. So we know that before the world was created, there was a world of chaos, but the world could not exist. And then God created a world which was a world of tikkun, a world of fixing. So the world of chaos preceded the world, therefore it's called the primordial world, and these are the primordial kings that we're talking about. So it's another name for the world of chaos is the primordial kings. So let's just have a little look in this. So these primordial kings are the root of evil, and they represent separate consciousness as opposed to divine consciousness. Why do they represent separate consciousness? Right? Because they're not part of a person's inner working. It's something which is impulsive, right? When you say that somebody follows his impulses and doesn't take things into account, doesn't think long term about of what this is going to affect. So that's another way of viewing this. That's another way of looking at the world of Toh, of chaos. It's a chaotic way of living, and it's not based in tikkun, which is divine consciousness. You had a question?
Yes. What's separate consciousness?
Separate consciousness it's not a part of my inner faculties, right? We have faculties of chokhmah, bina, and dat of right Chabad, which is intelligence. I like to call it intelligence, understanding, and wisdom. Which intelligence is what? It's something which is abstract, but it's something that you could attain. Exactly. Understanding is then the working of that intelligence. Right, and the wisdom is implementing that intelligence. So that's called the inner working of a person, right? That's not separate. That's something of who you are, right? Especially dat, especially wisdom. That's who you really are, right? As opposed to having an impulse, which is not part of your chokhmah, bina, and dat, right? framework. It's something which comes from above. You have a desire to do something, right? So then it's not something that you could explain, and it's something which is above you. So Kabbalah explains that the lower worlds, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, were constructed out of the fragments of these vessels, and thus are realms of increasingly non-divine oriented consciousness. So this is a major subject in Kabbalah, is that there's a concept of the breaking of the vessels, okay, which is called Shvirat HaKelim. And what Shvirat HaKelim is, and I'll tell you how the Midrash views the Shvirat HaKelim. The Midrash views the Shvirat HaKelim as God, at the beginning of the world, tried to create vessels. So he created vessels, and then he poured into it, right? The analogy of it is that he poured into it water, and the vessels couldn't withhold the water, and they actually burst open, right? So he had to make thicker vessels for the water to actually withstand, for the vessel to withstand the water. So vessels over here are the analogy of light, of light being entering into this world, right? And it needs to happen in a way that's in order, and it goes step after step. And what happens when there's too much light? There's a breaking of the vessels. And what happens to these vessels? So what happens to these vessels, according to the Arizal, is that these vessels, these shards of lights of chaos, went into existence, into this world. And essentially, that's why we're in this world. We're in this world to lift up these broken vessels of the primordial vessels that are they're chaotic, right? They're crazy, right? Us, right, being in this world is all about taking that chaotic side of existence and actually bringing it down into, bringing tikkun into it, bringing a light which is commensurate to the chaos. So let's just read what it says. In the collapse of the world of Toh, not only did the 7 lower emotional spherot shatter, the spherot of the intellect suffered a less drastic fall as well. Okay, and why is that? Because intellect is, right, intellect, once again, is something which is inner. It's something that goes within the person. Whereas the emotion is something which is, I'm sorry? Intellect, right? Seichel, right? Actually, how do we say intelligence in Hebrew? Right, wisdom. It's called chokhmah. And what is chokhmah? Chokhmah is the koach ma, is the power of what? That's what koach is. So it's the power of what? So it is a power. So it's something that works, but it's what, right? So it's really abstract. So as we have explained previously, the reason they did not shatter completely is because of the difference between intellect and emotion. Intellect, being more abstract, is not an experience of self-assertion as much as emotion is. The spirit of the intellect, therefore, did not clash with each other to the extent that the spirit of the emotions did. However, since the overall tone of the world of Toh is one of self-assertion and self-orientation, the external dimension or back of the intellectual spherot of Chokhmah and Bina did clash somewhat in the process and lose some of their intensity, and they fell. And the reason why there are 4 backs, right, and that refers to the intellect. So the intellect did fall, and that there are 4 backs of these 2 sphirot, of basically Chokhmah and Bina, is because they exist both in their totally abstract forms, which evolve in the next world, Atzilut, into the, okay, we'll skip that parentheses, and they're more applied forms, right, which actually bring us down So the number 4, it relates to the intellect. So what? Let's just. Why does the number 4 represent the intellect? Because I would just think that number 2 represents the intellect, right? According to the Zohar, the number 2 represents the intellect. It represents Chachma and Bina, right? That we see over there. That actually, that's according to the Zohar, it's father and mother, right? Intelligence and understanding are according to the Zohar, they're called father and mother. And the two of them, the union and their union, they're coming together is I like to call it wisdom, not knowledge, because that's first place in the Torah that is used. Does anybody know where? Eitzadat, right? But how is the marriage of Adam and Eve called? It says that Adam yada et Chava, that Adam knew Eve, right? So the language for intimacy in the Torah is dat, because that's what wisdom is. It's actually intimacy between the Chachma and the Bina. It's not just being abstract and just understanding things, but actually identifying with things, right? So we can have, for example, somebody that knows that, take for example, cigarettes are not good for them, right? And it says it on all the packages. And if you go to Europe, if you go to England, so they have a picture of a lung over there and stuff, right? And then they make it really intense. But for most people, it doesn't really make a difference, right? Unless the person, God forbid, had to go to the hospital, or he had a relative there that he had to visit, right? And then he sees the effect of those cigarettes on the person, right? He sees what it does to their lungs, and you see a picture, right? So that is called wisdom. So that's applied chokhmah and bina. It's not just knowing that it's unhealthy, but it's actually coming to the place of really feeling that it's not healthy. It's not feeling it emotionally, but it's feeling it intellectually, which is what dat is. It's feeling it intellectually. So we have actually 2 parts of wisdom, which are called chokhmah and bina, but it's really 3. That's the dat. But the thing about dat is not really a sphera. Because what is dat? It's really the connection between the 2 of them, right? How do we define dat? It's a feeling, but it's a feeling of chokhmah and bina coming together. But that in and of itself is not considered a sphera. So now we divide that into 2, because that feeling could be felt by chesed and gvura, right? By loving kindness, and by might, and by gvura and discipline. So that feeling is now something that I feel in my, right? I could actually be, I could hold back from, let's say, taking that next cigarette because of what I saw, right? So that's gvura effect. Or that wisdom, right, could bring me to actually want to, let's say, volunteer in this place. It's not just knowing that volunteering is a good thing to do, but it's seeing the effect that I could have on others. So it brings me to chesed. So therefore, chokhmah and bina actually also connect to chesed and gvura. Does that make sense? Right, through dat. So if we take dat and we translate what dat really is. So what is dat? Dat is really chesed and gvura. Right? So then we have 4 parts of intellect, which is why the tefillin has 4 compartments on it, right? We have 4 parts of the tefillin. On the head tefillin, but also the arm. There's 4 parshios. There's 4 chapters of the tefillin. And it's placed on the head, right? On the place of the soft part of the skull. Representing, right, the intellect, but there's 4 once again because it's chokhmah, bina, and then chesed and gvura, and then that has an effect of bringing it down. Right, the tefillin are about actually bringing it down with into emotions, right, and it's drawing it down into the practical. So the Arizal says, so we have 7, right, and we have 4. So once again, the 7 corresponds to those 7 spheros, fallen spheros, right, of the primordial kings, that fell down into this existence, that they're shards, right? That this is basically why we're here. We're here to uplift those broken sparks, right? That were there from the world of chaos. That's the number 7. And the number 4, it's a lesser of a descent, but it's still a descent. So together we have 11, which is the 11 days that Moshe is talking about. That you traveled 11 days from Horeb to Har Seir. Does that make sense? Okay. It doesn't make sense to me so much. Because what does this have to do with Horeb? And what does this have to do? It sounds like Horeb, like being on Mount Sinai is a good thing. Like, why are they traveling 11 days from that? What are they doing with that, right? How does this work? How did you get 11? So you got 11 and 7 and 4, like, right? But this is the Arizal. And that's the source of all Kabbalah is right here. Yeah.
Could you just explain what is the word Sufimos?
Yeah, I'd rather not go into that right now because it would totally take the rest of it. But just very, very briefly, a partsuf means a face, right? And it's something which comes up over and over in Kabbalah. And it's basically a unit, if that makes sense. It's basically a set of spheros. It's like right. It works together, right? They work together. That's what a partsuf is, right? A partsuf is a face, but you can't have a face with 3 eyes, right? Or 1 eye, two mouths. So a partsuf is basically all the spheros that come together in this way. Right? That's what a partsuf is. So now, let's go on a little further over here, okay? Is everybody good? Yeah? Okay, if you have any questions, comments, please. Okay. So next portion. Vehem, and the Arizal continues and he says, Vehem Yud Aleph Yom, and these correspond to the 11 fallen elements are the source of these 11 days. So the number 11 is especially significant because it is one more than the number 10. So we know that basically the number 10, that's our magic number in Judaism, right? I mean, besides the number 7, right? And the number 5, and the number 4, 12. Right? There's a lot of magic numbers in Judaism, right? Go, last Passover, right? You did the one Echad Miyodeh, right? So we go all the way up. But the number 10 is especially significant because that represents a unit of Sphirot, right? Represents a minyan. It represents a complete, right? A completion of some sort, right? So how do we get to the number 11? So number 11 is 1 up on 10. So how can we go 1 up on completion? So the Arizal says that Inyan Yud Aleph Siman Hektoros, that 11 represents the 11 spices of the Ketoret. And they are the 11 goat skin overhangings over the tabernacle and the 11 curses in the Parsha Tavo. And what are they? Let's just go a little bit further in here and we'll please God explain. Hem Yud Klipos de Noga. And they are the 10 shells of Noga. And they possess a holy life force which enlivens them. Okay? So, what is the Ketoret? Anybody know? What is the Ketoret?
Incense offering.
The incense.
Spices from the original government.
What the 11 spices are? The 11 spices.
Oh.
Yeah. So they're the Ketoret, right? That was brought. Well, does anybody know what the word Ketoret actually means? Ketoret means spice, but if we take it's actually not a Hebrew word.
It's incense.
It's incense, but the word Ketoret, the root word of Ketoret is Qatar, not the country.
Mm-hmm.
The Kuf, Tet, Resh, they are connected in some way in order to get all that affluence, but it means connection. That's what Qatar means. Qatar means to connect. It's another word for that is kesher. What's kesher? Kesher is a tie, right, in Hebrew. So in Aramaic, the shin and the taf are interchangeable. So you get that? Okay. So that's what Ketoret is. It's the word for tying. So Ketoret is incense, but what does that have to do with tying?
Tying all the Jews together and all their attributes, and looking up to God as one, and tying the Jewish people to Hashem.
Okay. So Ketoret is different than all the other korbanot, and all the other sacrifices that were in the temple, right? There's many types of sacrifices that were brought in the temple, and it says that in the Zohar it says that the secret of the sacrifice is the secret of the Ein Sof. So the regular sacrifices, although it sounds like what is this? What is a sacrifice? And it's right, not going into what the sacrifices really mean, but basically the sacrifice is taking physicality and transforming it into holiness. That's what a sacrifice is. Right? It's taking the lowliest dimension and bringing it up to the spiritual. Now, the Ketoret is also called a sacrifice, but it's the most refined type of a sacrifice, whereas all other sacrifices were more coarse, and it's about taking the coarseness, right, and elevating and transforming it. It's transforming the bitterness into sweetness, right, the opposite, right, the darkness into light. Right, the Ketoret is actually bringing up the almost like the more of a refined part of existence and of ourselves, which is why what did the high priest do in the Holy of Holies? Right, once a year he got dressed up for it in all white. Once a year he went into the Holy of Holies, and what did he do there? He lit the Ketoret, the incense, and he came out. So what does the Ketoret signify? It signifies a connection of the consciousness, right? It signifies a connection of the deepest aspect of the Jewish people, right? Of the person. And whereas the animal would signify, let's say, more of the physical, right? Or the emotional parts of the person, right? The Ketoret signifies more of the chokhmah and bina, more of the intellectual or the thought component, right? Because what happens constantly? We constantly think, right? That in and of itself is a whole, right, is a whole lesson, right? Because the thinking is what we constantly do. What the Ketoret does is it takes all those like the rumblings, right, inside, not just within ourselves, but also within all of dimensions, and it went completely straight up. It says that there were 10 miracles in the temple. One of the 10 miracles that is that the Ketoret always went straight up. It means it uplifted the thoughts, right? Where a person could go through ups and downs during the day 1,000 times, right? And we don't always pay attention to that. Actually, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov says that I go up and down 1,000 times a day, because he was cognizant of his thoughts and realized this thought is bringing me down, this thought is bringing me up, and has an effect on his emotions and everything like that. A tzaddik is aware of that. So Ketoret was the fixing of thought, which is basically who a person, right, the closer to who a person is than just his emotions and physicality. So the Ketoret is the tying of the person's consciousness with the divine. That's what it is. And it says about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he says about himself, says, Ana Ketoret, right? He says about himself that he says about himself that I am just a sign, just a point, right? And he says in this day, the day that he passed away, that I'm connecting with God in the realm of Ketoret. That's how Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar connected to God on the realm of Ketoret, of incense. That's what he says about himself. Yeah.
Ishbitzu Rebbe said that some of the spices were really malodorous. They smelled so bad, but they always were bundled with ones that smelled good, and together the blend was a beautiful thing. But it was that not just the smell was so bad, but that represented Jews who had maybe some qualities that were kind of yucky with the Jews who didn't have such yucky ones, but the unity was such a beautiful thing to see. It's kind of like in music how there can be a discordant note right before there's a harmonious conclusion to something. It like heightens attention, and then it all goes up together
brings it all
as
together.
you see this beauty.
Beautiful. So the thing is that there aren't many spices that smell bad. There was just one, and that's the 11th spice, which was called the gelbana, right? The gelbana,
Oh, okay.
right?
G-A-L-B-A.
And it was a putrid smell that if anybody would smell it, they would be so repulsed, right? But the Torah says that it must be added to the ketoret. If you don't add it to the ketoret, so then the ketoret is unusable, right? It's not called ketoret. And like you were saying, the ketoret represents the sinner almost, right? The person who is distant. So that person should never feel like they don't have a place. No, just the opposite. They do have a place. They do have a connection with the minyan, with this place of the 10, right? They do have that place. So what does the ketoret represent? The ketoret represents the other dimension, represents the other side. Why does it represent the other side? Because the number 10, like we said previously, the number 10 is that unit, but it represents the world of tikkun. It represents fixing, and represents actually chokhmah, bina, dat, and it goes through the 7th sphere and represents something which is internal, right? Something understood and something which is felt. But then the number 11 is the chaotic spice that doesn't join in with the other 10, right? Right? What's he doing? Like he's doing cartwheels and he's doing spins all over the place, and then the number 10 is like, we're doing what we need to do in that, right? So the number 11, the 11 spices represent the uplifting of the other side. And the word for that is sitra achra, right? The other side, the other dimension. And that was done in the temple every single day, right? And specifically on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, that was the ultimate. The ultimate is bringing the ketoret, right?
What about every single day in Yom Kippur then?
So for that question we have to ask what's the difference between Yom Kippur and every single day, right? Because all the actions of Yom Kippur are heightened, right? Yom Kippur is called Achas B'Shana. Yom Kippur is called the one time of the year, right? And it represents the ultimate unity of the soul with God. And actually there's 3 major connections that occur during Yom Kippur. One is the place dimension, right? What's the place dimension? The place dimension is the Holy of Holies. The other one is the time dimension. The time dimension is Yom Kippur, right? And then the third one is the Kohen Gadol, right? The high priest. And all 3 of them are like activated. So we have time, we have place, and we have soul going on all in the same day. And this is called, by the Arizal, it's called Ashan. Ashan is Olam, stands for Ayin is Olam, Shana is year, and Nefesh, and soul. And then another word for that, what's Ashan? Ashan means smoke, right? That's what Ashan means, smoke, right? So
The axis is the same. All these 3 things are different on that day.
Exactly. So the physicality is uplifted, and you have the holiest person in the generation, that's the Kohen Gadol, right, on the holiest day of the year, and all that is activated. So these are the 11 spices of the Ketoret, right? So the spices of the Ketoret on Yom Kippur are that much greater that they connect the entire Jewish people and the entire world to Ein Sof, right? In the words of Kabbalah, God is not called Hashem, he's called actually Ein Sof. What's Ein Sof?
Without end.
Limitless.
Infinity.
Ein Sof, he doesn't have any right? And it's interesting because God is something that the Arizal starts off actually his book, he calls God the Ein Sof. And it's very important for us to know that because God isn't something that we could just come and understand, limit according to our minds, right? It's something which is completely endless. So the way to connect to endlessness is also to be in that, right? In that form of what endlessness really wants and desires, right? So, okay. Okay, are there any questions? You guys are,
Where were they traveling from? It seems to me
they were traveling from the Mount Horeb.
Yeah, but to Sinai, and you said Sinai was another name for Mount Horeb. So if they're the same
Sinai
place-
is right. No, but it's called, but it is Mount Sinai. So there's the 11. So it's going to the number. It's going to the number 11. So like this. I'm going to leave the rest of these sheets with you. Once again, we touched upon like scratching like a little bit of the surface of these sheets, right? But I want to bring this down to more of a practical level for us, okay? So where do they travel from? So they traveled from Horeb, which is the Mount Sinai, and it's going through the desert. So what does the desert represent? So we said this last week, but the desert represents death. It's the opposite of growth. It represents the other dimension, right? In the desert, there's snakes and scorpions and things that right, that cannot live anywhere else. They live in the desert. So it represents the Sitra Achra, represents the other side. And the traveling, we mentioned last week, the traveling of the Jewish people in the desert is the traveling for 40 years. It was the traveling in order to conquer the other side, the other dimension, right? And we mentioned that those 42 journeys are something that actually we go through. Also, 42 journeys in our life, right? But God really wanted to bring us in really quickly, and these 11 days from Mount Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, which is basically on the edge of Israel, we could have done this, right? We could have done this right away. And the purpose of this travel is essentially we could have had like a quick fixing of the desert, right? 11 days representing the number 7 and the number 4, and going through and fixing it up in a quick way, and then going to the land and having basically geula, and basically having a state of bliss and utopia in a sense, reaching the land of Israel. It could have been that way. It didn't happen that way. It happened 40 years in the desert, 42 travels. But right, so let's take it a little bit to our lives, right? So the purpose of Torah, which is Mount Horeb over here, is basically not just to be on a mountain, and to be on a mountain to just be, which Tzfat is a mountain. It's called the Holy Mountain, right? Mount Meron is a mountain. But the purpose is not just for this wisdom or for a person's learning to be on a mountaintop and just to live like secluded. But the purpose of wisdom is to take it down off the mountain and to take it to wherever they're at, right, wherever they're from, right? And to apply that wisdom and to use that wisdom, right? And to share that wisdom with others. And this is actually what we see with the Arizal. There is probably him and Rabbi Yosef Karo are probably the two most important rabbis, luminaries that we have in this more modern, call it modern era, 1500s and on, if we could say that, right? They affected all of history, right? Right over here in the small mountain of Tzfat, they lived side by side in the same time, right? So what's interesting is that the Arizal lived on this mountain for just a short amount of time, just for 2 years. But in these 2 years, he took that wisdom and he took it off the mountain, right? And he shared it with the rest of the world. And actually, he didn't right out share it with the rest of the world, and students didn't do it right away. And it's a whole process of getting to this wisdom. So what we did today is we went to like this concentrated, almost wisdom. But what he did is he shared the keys to inner wisdom, which is Kabbalah, which is the esoteric, the mystical. And it was later on kind of like brought down even more and more and more and taught in a more of an understandable way, in a more of an applicable way, in the writings of Chassidut, right? And the Hasidic writings. The Baal Shem Tov later on brought down these teachings and made it actually more user-friendly, right? The Alter Rebbe and all the tzaddikim, right, brought it down into our lives. So practically, how do we connect to the wisdom of the Arizal? So to open, so Baruch Hashem, we went through a couple of lines of the Arizal, and I don't think we could go any further, today, but we could go further by studying inner wisdom, which is Chassidut, right? Which is brought down to us, right? Especially in the book of Tanya, which is really brought down in a very user-friendly form, in an understandable form, and in a way that we could access, because that is the purpose of Kabbalah, is understanding and becoming closer to God, being that level of Torah, being that level of, right, where a person is not just, this shouldn't just be intellectual for us, but this should be something that we could bring into our faculties. And right, so the Arizal starts us off, right, and then the other tzaddikim actually are able to bring it down even more and more, right? To work it in our minds and into our hearts and into the day-to-day practical, right, usage of this wisdom. So once again, so today is almost like a holiday in a sense of this wisdom, right, is revealed to the world. So what we could practically do is, like what the Arizal says, is taking these 11 spices, taking these 11 days of travel, and wherever we travel, to travel with the wisdom of inner Torah, right, which is basically it's the only thing that works in our generation. We live in a crazy generation, crazy times, trying times, right? Difficult times. And without, right, if you're going to just read the papers and try to make sense of what's going on, then you've looked in the wrong places, right? You can try to see what the latest Fox or CNN or BBC, then you're going to go even more berserk, even crazier, right? Because we realize that we can't make sense of what's going on basically in the world right now, and we've come to a place of chaos, right? Nothing less than that. And how do we make sense of chaos is by accessing Torah, wisdom, the wisdom of Torah, but specifically the inner wisdom of Torah, Kabbalah, which is why it's very significant that the Yahrtzeit of the Arizal is right in the 9 days, which is a chaotic time, right? It's not a coincidence that he passed away on the 5th of Av. It's literally right in the middle of the 9 days, actually closer to Tisha B'Av. So why did he pass away on this day? It's because these are the most difficult days in Jewish history. Always, right? Since the Jews were in the desert, and perhaps the sign for us, right, and the lesson for us that the Arizal passed away on the 5th of Av is that within all this turmoil, we have this luminary. We have to remember that by connecting to Torah in general, we make sense of what's going on, but more specifically when we connect to inner Torah. And there's no other way than to connect and to make sense of what's going on than inner Torah. So you had a question?
I had a question. Traditional Judaism, it's a big thing to discuss, but is
define traditional Judaism.
Right. Commentaries. What can we learn from this? How do we derive halakha from this?
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So, and that became very learned, and not all the masters could come along with this. And then comes along the Baal Shem Tov, and he says, "Look, I have something that you all can do, and it's more about it's also more in the heart, and you need to it has to be in your heart to do it really, and that's in the Torah. And so something basically simpler, but it actually comes from something to me much more complicated, which is, as you explained,
which is the Zohar, which is the Arizal, right? Exactly.
So that's boggling.
How is it simple?
Yeah, and it's also a problem for me personally, because when I sit at last week there was the theme was astrology, and then there's this class on astrology and with this chart over here, and very quickly it's okay. So what's your birthday? What's your name? It's that month. It's so you're more this, you're more like that. So the workings eventually are quite simple, are workable, but the background is very, very deep.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And Chassidut comes from Kabbalah, right? But yet Chassidut is, in a way even higher than Kabbalah. And it's not me who said that. It's actually the Lubavitcher Rebbe actually said that it stems from actually a fifth dimension. It's 4 dimensions of Torah, and Chassidut actually comes from a fifth dimension of Torah. Because it's something that's able to go down to the essence, not just intellect, not just emotions, but go down to the essence, which is what Chassidut is all about. But of course, Chassidut draws from Kabbalah, draws, and it is Kabbalah, right? But the applicability of it is for our generation. So I just want to share a story, and we'll end with the stories that one time the Alter Rebbe, they found actually one of the manuscripts of the Tanya on the floor, and one of the contemporaries of the Alter Rebbe said, what's going on, right? You dropped, that you see these great Kabbalistic teachings that are on the floor, and why? Because they were just like mass, publicized and given over to simple people, and now where do they end up on the floor? And it's disrespectful to those teachings. So this other tzaddik, a colleague of the Alter Rebbe, saw that, and he was very upset by that. And says a tzaddik, when he gets upset, it causes a commotion up in heaven. So up above, they had this almost problem with the Alter Rebbe with what he was doing. He was like sharing this deep Kabbalistic thoughts with everybody. So and we see it's disrespectful. So in heaven, they had it's called a kapeda. They had like a problem with the Alter Rebbe. And this other tzaddik knew what was going on. They had this connection, they had they were shared, they were brought into this. And he said to the Alter Rebbe, what's going on, in heaven, they're not so happy with what you're doing. So he said, let me give you a parable of what's going on. So the parable is that you have a king's son, right? A prince that is deathly ill. So everything that the king tries to do, he does, right? He hires the best doctors from all over the world, and they treat the son, and they give him all the medicines, whatever they do, but it's not working. So finally he has one doctor, and he says, the only thing left is that if you take your crown jewel, right, on top of on your crown, you take it and you grind it up. It's a certain type of a stone, and this type of a stone is going to be the remedy. So that's the only thing possible for you to save your son. So he said, of course. So right away, he had it taken off, and they ground it up. They made it into a potion, and by this time the king's son was already dying, right? And they poured a little bit of this potion in. They couldn't even get into his mouth, but a drop went into his mouth, and that drop revived him, saved his life. So the Alter Rebbe says that the king's son is us. And this last generation, we're it's just craziness, right? And trying to survive this last generation before Shiach and Galus and everything is just craziness. But the only thing that will work to save the king's son is that crown jewel. So it's coming from the highest place. The highest secrets are coming down to save who? To save the prince, which is us, right? So this deep esoteric wisdom came down to this world, right? And again, it came down through the Baal Shem Tov even more, and the Alter Rebbe even more, and all the tzaddikim, and all the Rebbe down even more, in order for us to have a drop of this. And this drop could be the drop that will save our lives. Right? You could think that it's all crazy and it's all insane, and just one drop and one like point of clarity is the thing that shifts everything, that makes things look different, that makes life look more doable, right? And gives us a different perspective on things and helps us deal with things differently, because it's a shift of consciousness, shift of how we look at things. And that's what today is all about. So it's the Arizal on the 5th day of Av, right in between destruction, right, is where his Yahrtzeit falls, to basically to teach us that that's in order for us to survive our own galus and our collective galus is by learning and by studying inner Torah, studying the esoteric part of Torah. And that's the thing which will save our lives and will bring the redemption, right? That's what the Arizal says. And he actually came to Tzfat, the Arizal came to Tzfat to bring the redemption. And he died, right? And very famous story, the Arizal said to his students, "Are you guys ready to go to Jerusalem?" It was Friday afternoon. And his students are like, "Well, yeah, but we have to ask our wives." So he said, "Forget it. We had a chance to bring Mashiach now. If we would have said yes, we would have all just we would have gotten to Jerusalem by using God's names, etc. And Mashiach would have been there. But because you guys had second thoughts, we're going to have to wait it out." So the Arizal came to Tzfat in order to bring Mashiach. So this inner wisdom is really the wisdom of Mashiach. It's the wisdom of what's going to be when the world becomes fixed. It's the weapon of Mashiach, right? And it's also our weapon. So please God, may we be blessed in the merit of the Arizal, and right, Shem Baruch Chai, the Zohar, that we should be blessed with, first of all, safety and peace upon the land of Israel. May our soldiers be safe and come back safely, right? May the schus of the Arizal and this learning go to the soldiers and all their dangerous, everything that they're doing for us, right? And may our learning be right on a daily basis be intensified by the study of inner wisdom, which is what the Arizal is all about. So we should be blessed to always hold on to the coattails of the Arizal, the coattails of inner wisdom, because that is what is going to, that one drop is what's going to give us life. So may we drink from their fountains, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
God bless. Have a great Shabbat, Rabbi.
Sure, absolutely. God bless, Steve.
God bless,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, Angelo.
Listen,
Shabbat
have an easy fast next week.
Thank you. Thank you. May we not have to fast. May we have
Mashiach now.
Exactly, Mashiach now. We should be in Jerusalem for Tisha B'Av.
Right. Oh man.
Yeah. Be well, Tasha. All the best. God bless you. Avner, all the best. God bless. All the best, Steve.
All the best,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.